Over 10 years ago, I started working with teenage composers at a school really near where I lived, helping them with their compositions. And one of the things that I noticed is that they were maybe fine working with four chords with a song, but when they got onto a project like writing film music, maybe, or instrumental music, they found it frustrating. They wanted to use chords in more interesting ways, but didn't really have the tools for it. So, what I'm trying to do here is give you not specific solutions, but ways of hearing what you're doing with your music to help you do the kind of harmony that you actually want to hear. There's nothing wrong with music that doesn't have a lot of chords, but this video is about moving beyond songs with four chords. If you're not someone who uses all the technical terminology, don't worry, this video is about listening. And we'll start by hearing from a couple of brilliant women about what they think about when they think about chords.
I think it still goes back to what I enjoy listening to. I don't think it's necessarily a conscious thing where like I have to have harmony, I have to have some kind of weird chord here or something like, or development in this way, just to be clever for the sake of being clever, which I know that can sometimes happen.
I always go back to emotion, and if it's hitting me emotionally, if a chord or a harmony is triggering something in me and moving me, that I'm like, okay, I'm on the right path here, and then I'll explore that. I have the general knowledge of it, so I kind of know where I can go, and then maybe that's kind of a cool thing, because then I'm like, that's where I can go, but then what happens if we try something outside the lines, break the rules? Because if you don't know every nook and cranny and all of the musical theory in the world, it's kind of cool, because you come across these happy accidents. Yeah, it's a very magical process. It's hard to describe.
I'm going to be dealing with the kind of chord sequences that you find in pop songs, classical music, show tunes, all that European and American music that's sort of bedrock of a lot of what people are listening to right now. And those kind of chord sequences are what are known as functional harmony. That's where we're going to start. And the first place we're going to start is with thinking about tension and release. So what I'm not talking about here is just that a chord is more tense than another chord because it's fancier, that chord is less tense than, let's say, this chord. Okay, maybe it is more tense, but that's not what I'm talking about. You can have all sorts of fancier chords. Great, that's all good. Use them. I'm talking about the relationship between chords and setting up patterns of tension and release. Let me show you what I mean. Quite simple. Let's say I'm in a key of G. So let's call that 1, the home key. We've got G, 2 is A minor, 5 is D, 1 is back home to G. Some of those chords are more tense than others. The G isn't tense at all. The A minor maybe got a bit of tension. Then the D7, much more tension, and then relax back into G again. So all I'm saying is the way that the chords relate to each other. And tense chords often want to go somewhere. They're much more comfortable resolving to one place than another. So, for example, if I play this chord, that feels like it's, definitely wants to go there, whereas doesn't really want to go there. That seems like a strange jump. You could probably make it work, but it's not as natural a tension-release structure. So tension is the feeling that your chord isn't resolved, that it's hanging. And the release is the feeling that that chord that you're on at that moment is resolved. It's happy to settle there. Now, when you hear a tense chord, that is often the trigger to somewhere more interesting. You don't have to take it, but let's explore what happens if you do take it. So with those examples that I've just been playing, I've heard that there's a tense moment and I've resolved it. What happens if I don't resolve it? Here you go. Here's a little sort of vamp. I'll just play a little thing. What I've done there is not taken the bait. Could you hear how when I got to this chord, which is a D7, it felt like it was hanging? And you were thinking, oh, it's going to resolve somewhere. I'm in the key of C. When I get to that bit, here I go. building up the tension, then it feels really disappointing to go back to C, even though that was my key. That's what I mean about not taking the bait. I've just ignored the bait there. So let's find out what would happen if I listened to that sense of tension and tried to resolve it. So here I'm not going to take the easy option of going back to the home key. I'm going to find what the chord is that's going to work. Luckily, I know what it is already. Some of you might be able to hear what it is. There it is. It's a G. It feels better to me that it's arrived at that chord. The C felt a bit disappointing, perhaps. But maybe you like both options. This is definitely an option. That's actually what we call a secondary dominant. But probably, if you don't know that kind of language, you probably heard that worked and have recognized that kind of sound. And that's going generally throughout this video. I will be clearing up a lot of these ideas as we go through, but if you don't know all the stuff of 1, 4, 5 and all the names of the chords, it's really not necessary. You can just use your ears and that will give you all you really need to know. Songs that go beyond 4 chords. Now, it's quite difficult to find examples of famous tracks that use chord sequences in a disappointing way. That's why they're classic tracks. It's because they don't disappoint. But for the sake of argument, let's kind of mess with a famous chord sequence. Let's take the chords for My Way, which you probably have heard, the famous Frank Sinatra track, which go like this. Okay. Let's say, instead of taking the bait, when I got to that chord and playing something else, I just repeated and went back to the beginning again. Back to the home key again. I could keep going around that for a while. You could probably make a pretty decent song out of that. But when it gets there, don't you want to go somewhere else? What we've got is that same relationship there, that D7, it's wanting to go somewhere else. Where does it want to go? So what chord should we go to if we're not just going to go back to F again? Well, if you know your music theory, you're probably screaming at the screen going, it's a secondary dominant. And that's exactly what it is. The trick is you find the chord that's feeling tense, in this case D, you count 5 down to find the dominant, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That takes you to G, and play a G. Let's see if it works. Yes, there you go, the classic My Way chord sequence. Now, My Way was originally a song called Comme d'habitude, a French song, which David Bowie had a go at doing a version of in English. Eventually, another composer did the version that we know as My Way, and David Bowie used exactly the same chord sequence. Life on Mars, exactly the same chords, totally different tune, and you get completely different tracks out of exactly the same thing. But it's got a classic sense of movement, of tension and release. More tension, release. Tension, release. What have we done here? We've created a chord sequence that is firstly longer, but more importantly, we've set up a sense of expectation in the listener where they're not able to predict exactly what's going to happen next. That's maybe the essence, one of the most interesting things about using more than 4 chords in a song. How do we create tension to make different sequences? We're going to do a chord sequence in C. We're going to go C, E minor, A minor, C. Pretty conventional, nice chord sequence, just the 3 chords. You could easily imagine someone writing a pop song over that. But you could inject tension just simply by making the last chord a C7, which sounds like this, just by adding this note here. So. Now that suddenly created a sense of tension where I want to move somewhere else. I don't want to stay on C, I want to go somewhere else. I would suggest the first thing to try out is our old secondary dominant trick that we tried in the last section. So we're on a C7. Let's just go 5 down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to F. Let's see if it works going to F. Yes. Often works, doesn't always work, but often works. That secondary dominant trick, where C7 is the dominant of F. Sounds technical, but it's just the first 4 chords of lots of songs. When a man loves a woman. Okay, loads and loads of songs are written in that way. Here's another solution. Then you could maybe go back to C there, or you could take the bait. I try the secondary dominant trick again. So I'm in F here. I just go 5 down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, B flat. Let's see if that works. It's nice, but it's not what I'm looking for. So I'm going to have to try and experiment. That's totally normal. You know that there's a better chord out there, but you're going to have to just try things. So the thing to do is just to try other chords that are in that key. So we're in the key of C, so what's in that key? E minor. Let's try that. Nice, but not what I'm after. Try another one. G. That's in the key of C. There it is. That's what I'm after. Then we have this chord sequence. Recognize it? It's a really famous chord sequence that you find in a lot of Baroque pieces by people like Bach, but also in rock pieces like Procol Harum's really famous track, Whiter Shade of Pale, which is one of the most successful singles of all time. I think it's number 31 last time I looked in the all-time singles selling charts. So brilliant chord sequence. In fact, the writers of that claimed that it was influenced by the track called Air on a G String by Bach. We'll look at that in the next section. Going from tension to tension. Instead of doing a simple tension-release relationship, creating that sense of expectation in the listener, but taking them somewhere they didn't think they were going to go. So the chords for Air on a G String that I just mentioned go like this. And when you get to this point, the A there, it really just wants to go back home, here, to D, the home key. But that's not what Bach does. So if we do that change again. Then here. Probably didn't see that coming, but it sounds really good. Listen to this. Okay, so here's the version with everything on top of these chords. Coming up, 3, 4, D. Home key, not 10th. D, and G, pushing away. In more tenths. A7, more tenths, and then more tension. F sharp. B, B7. A smaller release here for the E minor. G, A, building in tension, A7, and release back to D again. What happens if we took the classic 1, 6, 4, 5 chord sequence and found a substitute for one of those chords? It's such an easy trick, and it's really something you can try. Shouldn't give you too much grief. I've already been kind of doing it when I was doing some of the doo-wop songs in the previous video. I could go 1, 6, then 2, and then 5. In other words, I've substituted 2 for 4. What are those chords? Instead of playing C, I played A minor, which is what is known in the trade as the relative minor. They share a lot of notes. C has got these notes. A minor has got these notes. It's only that one that's actually changed. That's why you can substitute them. The other classic way of substituting them is literally to, instead of changing to relative minor, you just make the chord that you're playing minor. Instead of going, you can just play G minor. Again, all I've got to do is change one note, and you'll often find that it's pretty straightforward to substitute, and it might start taking your piece in a direction that you weren't expecting and that the listener wasn't expecting. In Air on a G string, we're in D. And the natural second chord of that is E minor. As we move up the scale, it's E minor. And I could make loads of chord sequences that involve that. What if I just substituted E minor for E major, or even E dominant 7, which is a major chord with that note added, that D? Well, it would immediately give a different effect. Instead of going like this, it would sound like this. Got much more tension just by making it major instead of minor, and it starts to want to go somewhere else. Where does it want to go? It's our old friend again, the secondary dominant. Go down 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to A. I just know that's going to work. And of course it works. Created more tension, and therefore the release is going to feel like more of a release. You see this a lot in gospel music, jazz music, lots of different sorts of music. Sometimes those songs are using pretty much the same chords as doo-wop that we were looking at in our video earlier, but they're just using these substituted major chords and minor chords and dominant 7th chords to create more tension. So I'm not going to substitute any chords here. Pretty good. If I change some of these chords, making some minor or major or 7ths, you get a chord sequence that is used in hundreds of songs. Sounds like this. Probably heard that in lots of gospel music. It's a very famous Ray Charles track, amongst many others. You'll notice that when you start to do some of these tricks, creating more tension in your music, you're often adding sharps and flats, notes that aren't in the original key signature. What do I mean? Well, we're in the key of G there. To play a G major scale, I just have to add one sharp there, F sharp. But just simply by changing the E minor that we looked at earlier to E7, adds this note here, that G sharp, and that definitely isn't in the key of G. You can hear how tense that sounds. Sounds totally natural when you play this, but it's tense and wants to go somewhere else, away from the original key, away from the home key. Finally, some more ideas on substituting chords. Can be more adventurous with this idea, not just doing major minor, but other kinds of substitutions. There's a wealth of resources out there on the internet for you, on YouTube and elsewhere, with some superb jazz artists especially. They're the people that really know this material inside out, who will give you tons of ideas. But just to get you going, instead of having a chord sequence like this, D minor, G7, C. It's a pretty standard classical sequence. Instead of playing D minor, I play F minor. They share one note. Instead of playing G7, I play B flat 7. They share one note. And instead of playing C, I play C major 7. They share 3 notes. And then you get this sort of chord sequence. So there you go, a classic chord substitution kind of trick that you would see in jazz. Here's another quick one. Imagine if you had this chord sequence. It's even more boring. C, G, C. Usable, but boring. I could just do this, C, G minor 7, that's a major minor substitution. Then a C9. That has created tension, making me want to go to F. So I could just do this. C, G minor 7, C9. That creates tension, and I want to go to F. Suddenly I've got the first 4 chords of Misty. So I've got quite technical there. I'm using a lot of terms, I'm using some fancy chords, but I hope that it was audible what was going on in terms of tension and release, and gave you some thoughts about how you can push your chord sequences further. So the take home here is A, look for tension. If you hear it, capitalize on it. If you haven't got any, make some. B, you will probably find tension when you're using notes that aren't in your key signature. So you might have to alter chords or substitute chords in order to get that tension. C, 7th chords have a lot of tension. They'll always be useful if you're trying to find a new chord destination. D, you don't have to go tension release. You can go tension tension. E, you can always substitute a chord for the chord that you don't want to use simply by using one which shares one or more notes with it, and see where that takes you. Word about using online resources, YouTube tutorials, chord charts and so on that you would find online. There is a lot out there. There's stuff by classical people, there's some of it really good, and there's also really good stuff by jazz people and songwriters. So the world is your oyster. But I do want to say that the best way of learning about harmony is to just play loads and loads of pieces of music, just to learn pieces of music. Be aware that sometimes the same chord can have different names. So for example, A minor, if you flatten the 5th, lots of people will call that A minor flattened 5th, but it could also be called A diminished. So it often depends on the context. Just look out for it. It can be confusing if you're just starting out. Finally, do be aware that people who have posted the chords online, they may have made mistakes when they worked out there might be a chord here or there that isn't 100% accurate. That's pretty normal. Just use your ears, listen to what the actual track sounds like and make the necessary corrections, which may involve changing key. They might have written it in a key that works with guitar rather than piano. So there may be some adjusting. Don't expect it to always be like that. Very, very easy to work out a chord sequence from a chart online. So be adventurous, listen to music which has interesting chord sequences. Listen to some gospel, listen to some Motown maybe, some show tunes, some Joni Mitchell, some Kendrick Lamar. I mean, there's so many examples. If you look down below, you'll find that there's in the description a list of links which has got some brilliant artists with incredible chord sequences that we think you might have something to learn from. So go and check them out.